listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. Today, I want to share an experience that I had. In the last episode, I talked about going to a hotel for Memorial Day weekend and wanted to share another observation. At first, I talked about the experience of the little boy and the dad in the pool. And another noteworthy takeaway from the weekend was the number of children on vacation with their family who sat at restaurants, at the hotel pool, in the lobby, wherever children happened to be, sat staring at a device in their hands. And the thoughts I had about that. So I'm interested in this topic because as a therapist, as a private practitioner that works with children in the community, I see the effects of this every single day with increased levels of anxiety, with increased diagnoses of ADHD, with problematic behavior and tantrums, emotional dysregulation, children feeling isolated and disconnected. I get calls about those types of concerns every single day, multiple times a day. And I think it's often misunderstood the root cause. So in this episode of the podcast, I would like to talk about using digital pacifiers. And I will explain what I mean by that. But the concept of the digital pacifier and how that breaks the relationship within the family. I'd also like to share some of the research and the data about the addictive nature of screens and the video games and the social media and all of the things that kids are doing when they're looking at a device. And then finally, I'd like to share that as use has increased, so as children are using screens more and spending more time on them, the diagnoses have also increased across the country, and then therefore the need for interventions has also increased, and we'll look at and unpack that process. So the path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so we went away really quickly, brief, like 2-day trip for Memorial Day, and checked into the hotel, and we get there, we get our room, and we wanted to eat. It was pretty late in the day, and so we were hungry already. So we go to the hotel restaurant, and right away, there are kids, scattered all throughout the restaurant, all throughout the lobby, and in every direction, you could see a child holding a phone, a tablet, an iPad, some device of sorts. Some were very clearly theirs because kids have those industrial strength, like bright colored, cases for their devices. You know that actually is theirs. And then you could tell some were using a parent's phone or, tablet of some sort. And it breaks my heart when I see kids just sitting staring at a screen, knowing how damaging it is. And then even what I found even more tragic to a degree is the number of parents that were also sitting staring at their phone or their iPad or their laptop. And, you think about the connection that is forged between families and the relationships that are built between parents and their kids. That requires interaction. It requires purposeful and intentional communication. It requires spending time and looking at each other and talking about things that are important and processing the world together. And, I remember going on family vacations as a child. We would almost always take trips to the Carolinas. I'm in Florida, grew up here. So we would almost always go to North or South Carolina, sometimes southern eastern Tennessee. And we would always take road trips and go to the mountains. That was our favorite vacation spot. And, I didn't have phones. I didn't have tablets. At one point, I ended up with a Game Boy. That was huge because we had never had anything like that. But, my brother and I played and we talked and we played the license plate game and we looked at the map together and we figured out where we were going and looked out the window and played I Spy. And, there were so many things that we did collectively as a family on vacation where it was a bonding time for us. It was something that gave us memories that were shared, and we had experiences that we reflected back on. And I looked around at the hotel and I'm thinking to myself, these families are supposedly on vacation, which I would argue, I think most families go on vacation to unwind and to spend time together and to get away from the busyness of life, with the hope, I would assume, that you forge a deeper connection and relationship and you share experiences and memories together. And I thought, this has just been absolutely starving them, their use of screens and sitting around staring at a phone or a tablet or whatever. It's starving them of the thing that I assume they most wanted out of vacation. I don't think anyone says, I want to go on vacation so that I can just stare at my phone at the hotel. There were 2 pools. There was this beautiful boardwalk that took you from one part of the property all the way to the other. It was right on the bay, so you could walk out on the dock and there were chairs out there and people were fishing and there were paddle boards and jet skis and kayaks and all this amazing stuff, like a sandy beach area, and the mangroves were right there and there were birds, and we saw little tiny, oh my gosh, what are those crabs called? I forget. Anyway, we saw these really cute crabs that have these massive claws, and we were laughing about how one claw was so much bigger than the other. And I'm experiencing that with my family, thinking all these other families are being starved of these incredible experiences that I'm sharing because we're not on phones. And so unfortunately, I think part of the problem is that parents and adults, we get caught up in being on our devices too often as well. So this wasn't just a child problem that I noticed. This was a family problem because the parents were doing it too. And so, that digital pacifier concept, when you're a baby, I personally didn't use pacifiers with my son, but I know lots of parents do. When you're a baby, you need something to soothe you. You get a pacifier put in your mouth. I think that we're at this point as a culture and as a society where we need to be pacified. And the thing that we think is the best option is to stare at a device. And if you go on vacation to decompress and to relax and to rest and to rejuvenate, that is soothing. You don't have to have your face staring at a digital pacifier to do that. And it stops the relationship formation when you have that interruption. So wanted to share my thoughts on that. We don't need digital pacifiers as a society, or we shouldn't anyway. And if we feel that we need something to kind of help us get into a more contented state, screens should not be the choice. So next, I want to talk about the addictive nature. And I think this actually ties into the first point because we don't realize how much we need screens and how much we need what we're doing on the screen. And it becomes the pacifier that we feel that we have to have. The science that's coming out, not being widely circulated, I admit, but the science that's coming out about the addictive nature of video games, of social media, of all of the things that we're doing when we're on a device. The big tech companies are hiring psychologists, psychiatrists, neuroscientists, really, really smart people who are knowledgeable about the brain, how it works, what our pleasure centers are, how we engage the pleasure centers, what chemicals change in the brain when we experience pleasure. And I don't want to bore you with a whole bunch of neurobiology, but the data is saying that these very, very smart, intentional, purposeful people are coming in to the big tech companies and saying, if we do this, it makes it more addictive. If we put this in there, they'll keep coming back for more. If we have this component, people will feel compelled to constantly log in and check. If we have this sound, this light, this reward, this whatever, it will keep people hooked. And unfortunately, our kids are the guinea pigs for this. And so I don't know if you're following, but there's a lot of legislation going through right now where they're trying to block big tech and some of the big technological companies from creating platforms specifically for kids. They're asking on the research that's been collected that has been conducted on kids. So I think people are starting to wake up a little bit, but we have psychologists and psychiatrists and neuroscientists who are intentionally making the devices that we use and that we allow our children to use highly addictive. And that's horrifying to me, because if you look at the data, it shows that the pleasure centers and the dopamine in the brain light up when you're in front of a screen and you are engaged in one of the games or one of the social media outlets, and the dopamine increases the same way as if you were using an illegal drug. So to say this is addictive and that it is a sort of drug is not a stretch. It absolutely is. And therefore we get hooked, and therefore we constantly need more. And then we go through withdrawal when we don't get it. The process is exactly the same. So our pleasure centers are wired in such a way that it rewards the behavior and you want it more and more. So we have to be very careful of acknowledging our own level of addiction to screens. You know, if we constantly have to check our phone, if we constantly have to be on social media, if we constantly have to be staring at a device, there's probably a level of addiction for ourselves as well. But what about our kids? Kids are spending hours and hours a day. And that's concerning, because not only is it damaging to their brain, it's also addictive. And so then they need it more and more. And here's another anecdote, but I think it's important for us to understand. The developers and biggest guys in the big tech world, so Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and lots of really high up in the big tech world people, they have for years very publicly admitted that they do not allow their own children to have phones, tablets, iPads, no TVs in their rooms. Their children were extremely limited in their access to devices and screens. Which begs the question, why? Why are these individuals in these companies making products and creating technological options that they don't allow their own children to use? I think, first of all, that raises concern. But second of all, I think it speaks to they know how addictive and damaging it is. And so they're protecting their own children from it, while the rest of the world doesn't know any better and is allowing their children to use devices at an unhealthy level. So big concern there, the addictive nature of that. And then finally, as use has increased, when I was growing up, no such devices existed, right? So I was able to watch TV at my house. When I was a little bit older, we got a Nintendo, the original Nintendo, and I played Duck Hunt and Super Mario Brothers. But that was randomly, several times a week for 30 minutes at a time. And, I did not grow up around screens to the degree that our children now are. And so as the use has increased, diagnoses for children have skyrocketed. We have more and more diagnoses than ever before. Children are being diagnosed with all kinds of things now. And because of that, prescription medication has also gone up. I just recently read a study that anxiety medication prescribed to children, so pediatric prescriptions of anxiety medication, has gone up 3,000%. So imagine you have kids that are addicted to using screens. They're on screens all the time. The screens themselves, the video games themselves, are actually damaging to the brain. So white matter, gray matter, frontal cortex, all kinds of things in the brain are being affected by screen use, excessive screen use. And then it's causing all kinds of emotional and behavioral problems. And then they're having to be diagnosed, and then they're having to be medicated. What a crazy slippery slope that just horrifies me as a therapist, because I'm the one that sees the effects of this probably more than most. Every day, kids come into my office and they're a nervous wreck. They're anxious. They feel isolated. They have no self-esteem. They can't sleep. They've been diagnosed with ADHD. They can't focus at school. It all filters back to their screen use and what it's been doing to their brains. So interestingly, we have seen a huge surge as a country in facilities that have popped up all over the country. And they are detox facilities similar to, you can go to alcoholic recovery, you can go to drug recovery, you can go to, other types of addiction, gambling anonymous, things like that. They have started building inpatient facilities specifically for people addicted to screens. So they have these wilderness detox off the grid programs. They have these facilities where you check yourself in and you're not allowed to have any screens for, the 2 months that you're there. And they've slowly popped up here and there all over the country. We wouldn't have a need for those if we didn't have a population that was overly addicted to screens. Facilities don't exist unless they're needed. So the fact that they're popping up everywhere, and most people don't even know what they're there for. They know there's a facility. They don't realize that it's a device detox facility or a screen detox facility. So that's a huge concern for me. And I think that we have to be aware and we need to know that this is happening. We have to protect our kids from this. So just to kind of summarize really quickly, we need to be careful because we can be guilty of using our devices too frequently and too much as well. But that prevents us from having the connection and the relationship with our families that we want. So the amount of screens that we use as a family is directly correlated with the amount of connection and relationship that we build. Secondly, there are too many things built into the games and the screens that are addictive, and we have to be really careful of what we allow our child to be exposed to. And then finally, with the increased use, the increased diagnoses, and the increased medications, now we have an increase in interventions. So there's facilities popping up where all of a sudden now we, have people getting checked in and they go 3 months without any screens, and it's basically a detox for them. This really is a problem. This is something we need to be very concerned about. And I want us as parents and as caregivers and adults in the lives of kids to be knowledgeable enough to make the best decisions on behalf of them. So now that you know, now that you've been made aware, now that we've shared all of these things together, and yes, this all started with my experience at a hotel, but this is what, now that you know, pay attention. Go to a restaurant, go to the grocery store, look next to you when you're at a stoplight, and look at the person in the car next to you. Watch children in strollers, watch children when they're sitting waiting for something. Just be aware and pay attention, and you will see it everywhere. You will start to recognize kids with a device in their hand almost at all times. And so now that you know, and now that you'll be aware, here's what I encourage you to do. First of all, educate yourself. Don't take anything that I told you at face value. Don't just assume that it's true. I mean, I've done my own research and I believe with my whole heart everything I shared with you is true. But educate yourself. Do some research. Do some search queries. Look into this topic and see what you find, and see if you find corroborating evidence for what I'm sharing with you. Second of all, equip yourself. Know what you're going to do when you find yourself wanting to sit in front of your phone or your iPad. Know what you're going to do if your children want to sit in front of their iPad or play a game or be on social media. You have to arm and equip yourself with appropriate and effective tools and solutions to address the problem. And one thing that I have created for you that I think is helpful to you is a book, Device Detox. You can get it on Amazon. It is in Kindle version or ebook version and print version. Device Detox. It's available on Amazon. I have walked you through an entire system of reducing the amount of screen time and preventing tantrums along the way. It's great for kids 3 to 11. So if you have children in that range and you think that would be helpful, please check that out. I also have a training that goes along with it, a video training. So if you wanted to take it a step further, that is available on my websites. Please be aware that we cannot continue to passively accept screen use as the norm. We can't continue to allow it and look the other way and act as if it's not an issue. So part of what I would encourage you to do is make a stand, make a decision, and say, I'm not going to allow this to damage my children. I'm not going to allow this to get out of hand. I'm not going to allow this to continue at the level that I've allowed it in the past. There has to be a decision that you make as a family for what is healthy and what is a balance. And I mean, there are American Pediatric Association recommendations for how much screen time a child should get based on their age. Maybe you go by those guidelines. Maybe you go by child basis of what child can handle more screens and what can't. Whatever makes the most sense for you. Maybe it's saying after this time at the day, I'm not even going to pick up my phone again. As the parent, maybe you need to say, I have to stop looking at my phone too. Whatever that takes, whatever decision that requires, I encourage you to make it. We have a very strict screen policy in our home with our son. He does not get any video games during the week whatsoever, and he only earns times on the weekends. That's what works for us. There's all kinds of options, and the book Device Detox does walk you through lots of options for that. But whatever you do, make sure that you decide as a family what is appropriate and what is healthy and what is good, and work toward that. And it may not happen overnight, and that's okay. It didn't get to this point overnight either. So it may take some time to adjust and to rein that in and to find a balance. But I encourage you to do it because it really is that important. In the next episode, I want to unpack an article that I read recently. And the article talked about, I love my kids, but I hate being a parent. And that article title caught my attention, and I want to share what the article said and my thoughts and some encouragement that I have for you. And we will look at that next time. So as always, thanks for being a part of this podcast. We will talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more parenting training and to subscribe to our newsletter, go to www.thekidcounselor.com.